Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we've pulled together a really an extraordinary stack of sources.
It's quite the collection.
It is. It's a mix of conversations, deep research reports, even financial filings, and together they paint this vivid and honestly often jarring picture of the world right now.
Right.
We're going to be hitting everything from this feeling of generational economic despair and what that's doing to politics, all the way to these massive, high-stakes, corporate hostile takeovers in Hollywood.
And then we've got some really counterintuitive policy regulations and maybe one of the surprisingly simple truth about how you actually build lasting wealth.
Exactly.
And the sources might seem eclectic, all over the map, but there are these powerful subterranean connections running through all of them. What we're really tracking here are massive flows of capital and economic pressure.
So our mission, as always, is to filter through all of that noise.
Right.
We want to extract the core nuggets that you need to be truly well-informed. And today, we're really focusing on two big interconnected themes.
The first is this crushing affordability crisis that's hitting young Americans. It's driving this unprecedented political volatility.
Okay, a second.
The second is the powerful shifting role of global capital. Specifically, we're looking at money from the Middle East and how it's maneuvering to control the future of Western media.
That's our roadmap. And look, to avoid just overwhelming you with information, we're jumping right into the core shockwave of our material.
Here's the start.
We're starting with a massive political signal. It's a poll that suggests a profound and historically fast shift in how young Americans are feeling, and it seems to be driven entirely by raw economic pressure.
Right.
So let's just unpack this political data first because it's pretty wild.
It is.
We have to talk about this specific CNN poll. It was tracked by the political data analyst Harry Anton, who's, he's known for this stuff. He tracks voter cohorts, long-term sentiment.
He's very good.
And the movement he's seeing in the 18 to 29 age bracket is, frankly, it's staggering. And this is the demographic that, not long ago, showed unusually high support for a Republican candidate.
It was a remarkable performance, historically speaking. If you just look back 10 months ago, February, Donald Trump's net approval rating among voters under 30 was actually plus 10 points.
Plus 10,
yeah.
Which for a Republican with young voters that's a powerful position to be in.
Very strong position with the future voting base. But when you look at the most recent data, that number hasn't just dropped. It has cratered.
Okay, so where is it now?
It is now sitting deep in negative territory at minus 46 points.
Minus 46.
Yeah.
So we are talking about a 56-point shift in the wrong direction.
In just 10 months.
10 months. I mean, to put that in perspective for you, in modern polling history, you almost never see a move that big that quickly.
Not for a major political figure, no.
Yeah.
Not unless there's, some massive unforeseen scandal or a huge global event.
Right. This is a political earthquake. It's signaling a complete rupture in support.
And when the pollsters did their own deep dive to figure out, what's causing this, what is the causality of this rupture, the answer was stark and very familiar.
Let me guess. The economy.
It's the economy. Specifically, affordability. If you drill down into just the economic metrics, Trump's net approval on handling the economy among that same demographic, 18 to 29, it suffered a parallel collapse. It's currently sitting at minus 52 points.
Minus 52. So this is concrete evidence. The pain is acute, and they are directly blaming the political leadership for the economic conditions they're living in.
Exactly.
This is more than just, feeling broke. This feels like a systemic failure to launch the next generation's middle class.
I think that's a good way to put it.
And this is where the conversation gets really crucial, because on one hand, we have these powerful data-driven arguments proving the crisis is an absolute reality, but then they're constantly matched against this really skeptical perspective that argues the crisis is either a political messaging hoax or maybe just a reflection of, a different set of priorities for young people.
But dueling narratives.
Exactly. So let's anchor this first in the hard data. What does the data say?
Well, the data concerning the fundamental pillars of the American middle class it's irrefutable.
Yeah.
Just look at housing affordability long term. 50 years ago, the ratio was pretty stable.
Right.
It took roughly 3.5 times the average annual salary to buy an average-priced house. So if you were a new college graduate making a median wage, owning a home was a realistic goal, maybe in 5-10 years.
And that structural reality it's completely disintegrated.
It has. Today, that multiple has more than doubled. In a lot of cities, it's approaching a triple. We're now talking about 7.5 to 8.5 times the average salary.
8.5 times.
So think about what that means. If a young professional is making, say, $70,000, a totally respectable starting salary in many fields, they're staring down a minimum mortgage of $500,000, $600,000.
Yeah.
It's completely out of reach once you factor in rising interest rates, insurance, property taxes.
That magnitude of change, it fundamentally alters your life choices.
Of course it does.
If you can't anchor yourself with housing, you delay everything. You delay starting a family, you delay career changes, and you accumulate this frustration.
And the crisis isn't just about buying a home. Look at the rental market, which hits this demographic right away. The Miami-Dade Commission, and this is not a right-leaning body, reported that rents in Miami went up 38%.
38% in how long?
In the 4 years leading up to January of 2025.
Wow.
That kind of spike, it's like a financial hammer blow. It just crushes young professionals earning $75,000, $80,000. They simply can't afford to launch their careers in major cities anymore.
So that leads to what some of the sources were calling this youth exodus.
Right. They either leave high-opportunity cities or they're forced into these overcrowded living situations well into their 30s.
And then there's transportation, the other massive non-negotiable expense.
And average car prices have just shot up. They're now reaching $50,000 for the first time ever.
So incomes are basically stagnating relative to these three core things: housing, insurance, and cars.
And if the middle class can't afford the very foundation of its existence, you risk political destabilization.
Which is the historical lesson, right?
It is. When economic stability erodes for the broad working and professional class, the search for alternatives begins.
So this inability to meet basic needs through traditional work pushes people toward, what, more socialist tendencies?
It often does. They start looking for systemic, government-led solutions to problems they feel they just can't solve on their own anymore. That 56-point political shift we started with, that's just the manifestation of this foundation cracking.
But here's the critical counterpoint we have to address, because this data is constantly challenged by a very skeptical, very powerful narrative that tries to minimize the crisis. Former President Trump, for example, called affordability a Democrat scam and a con job. So what's the logic behind that perspective?
The underpinning is basically twofold. First, they argue that this whole focus on affordability is a political strategy.
A messaging hoax.
A messaging hoax, exactly. Designed to overshadow genuine economic improvements. Like, for instance, gas prices dropping to $2.94 a gallon in late 2025.
So the argument is, if the fundamentals like energy costs are improving, then the complaints about affordability must be manufactured.
It's manufactured hysteria, designed to maintain political tension. That's the argument.
And what's the second part of that skepticism?
The second part targets the young generation's work ethic directly. It's the lazy youth argument.
Ah, okay. I've heard this one.
Yeah, this argument posits that the current generation of graduates just lacks the necessary persistence.
So they're not tough enough.
The anecdotes that were cited were powerful. They talked about previous generations graduating into recessions and needing 7-9 months of just relentless effort.
Hundreds of calls, letters.
Dozens of interviews just to land a post-grad job. The skeptical view suggests that today's youth expect a 6-figure salary right out of school with no experience.
And if the path isn't easy, they retreat and blame the system.
That's the narrative.
That's a challenging argument, because while the financial data proves the structural problems are real, the work ethic claim is about individual initiative.
It's the classic structure versus agency debate.
Right. But when they cite previous generations having to work relentlessly during recessions, aren't they comparing the worst historical period for one generation to the current situation for another?
That's a very fair critique.
Yeah.
And it's the crucial difference between a structural constraint and a personal expectation. The data suggests the structural constraints, those cost multiples, are just far, far steeper now than they were 50 years ago.
But the skeptical view doesn't care about that. It insists the solution is personal adaptation.
Exactly. They frame affordability as fundamentally a choice.
So the advice is, what if you can't afford Miami or New York? Change your zip code.
Precisely. Relocate to what was colorfully termed Bumble F or Des Moines.
Okay. Yeah.
Or accept having 3 roommates into your 30s. They argue very directly that owning a house is not a guarantee of being an American. It's a reward you earn through extreme persistence, sacrifice, maybe working multiple jobs.
A hustle they believe the current generation is unwilling to perform.
Correct.
So let's look at the ultimate consequence of this affordability anxiety because it just played out in a major conservative bastion.
In Miami.
In Miami. The mayoral election resulted in a Democrat, Eileen Higgins, winning and replacing the conservative Mayor Suarez.
And this is a huge political canary in the coal mine. Suarez was the definition of the modern, entrepreneurial, business-friendly Republican mayor.
He was the how can I help tweet guy trying to lure Elon Musk to the city.
The very same. And Higgins defeated the Republican candidate, marking the first Democratic mayor in Miami since 1997.
That's a 30-year shift.
The 30-year shift.
And the mechanism of her victory is what matters here. She ran almost exclusively on one single issue.
Affordability.
Affordability. This shift, combined with similar outcomes we're seeing elsewhere, it validates the idea that this isn't a manufactured hoax, it's a political battering ram.
Yes, and it's capable of flipping deeply conservative strongholds. When people's core economic stability is threatened, the politics of traditional ideology often takes a backseat to the politics of immediate material survival.
So, okay, the political pressure is intense.
Yeah.
If affordability is the #1 problem and the youth are signaling their dissatisfaction with a 56-point swing, what do we actually do?
Well, that's the painful reality.
The problem is that policy solutions are inherently slow, right? Especially in the U.S. system.
Excruciatingly slow. Housing solutions, which are the biggest cost driver, they typically take 3 to 5 years to manifest in any meaningful way.
3 to 5 years.
We've got long lead times for planning, for getting permits, for navigating zoning changes, securing multiple city council votes. I mean, the political system demands a fix yesterday, but reality dictates a marathon pace.
But the sources did offer a specific, actionable 3-step plan. It was focused on the local and state levels, things that could actually accelerate progress.
They did, and it addresses both supply and cost at the same time.
So let's dig into those. What's step 1?
The first step is all about the construction cost inflation caused by bureaucracy. So, step 1, reduce red tape and regulation on builders.
What does that mean in practice?
This means cities often layer on permits and review processes that add 6 to 18 months and 20 to 30% to the cost of construction.
So just pure friction.
Pure friction.
Right.
So an active engagement from city leadership to streamline this, to treat affordable housing developers as partners, not adversaries, is crucial. We're talking about things like dedicated fast-track review boards for certain housing sizes or zoning overlays.
Okay, so that addresses time and cost.
Yeah.
What about the raw supply of land? That's the most precious resource.
That's step 2. Release city land.
So cities are just sitting on usable land.
Many are. Even cities that seem dense, they often own previous industrial areas, defunct utility land, or parcels that are tied up in these long-term underperforming leases.
So the idea is to put that land to better use.
Exactly. Utilizing this publicly owned land, rezoning it, and releasing it specifically for high-density, affordable housing development is the fastest way to increase supply.
Are there any good models for this?
Yeah, we looked at places like Frisco and Addison in Texas. They successfully implemented these planned, centralized developments that offered safe, good, and relatively affordable housing for professionals. It mitigated the sprawl issue while increasing density.
Okay, and the third step addresses an external but skyrocketing cost insurance.
Yes. Step 3, fix the state insurance commission.
This is one people often overlook.
They do, but it has devastating consequences. State regulations can sometimes drive insurance companies right out of the market because of perceived risk or restrictive rate caps.
So you end up with no competition.
You get a lack of competition. When only 1 or 2 carriers are left, they can charge exorbitant rates. And that immediately drives up the cost of mortgages, rent, because the landlord's costs go up, and car ownership.
So state reform is needed to bring insurers back.
To create a predictable environment that brings them back and drives down costs through competition. Yes.
Okay, so those 3 steps provide a concrete path for housing. Now let's pivot to transportation, the other huge cost burden. This is where we run into the tiny car policy.
Right.
It's this seemingly elegant solution that just hits a brick wall of unintended regulatory consequences.
It's a fascinating case study. The proposal, championed by certain political figures, is simple on its face. Greenlight the building of tiny cars in America, gas, electric, whatever, because they're inexpensive, they're safe, and they're fuel efficient.
And the inspiration is vehicles like the Fiat Topolino.
Exactly. Tiny, it's 8.5 feet long, slow max speed of 28 miles per hour, short range, 50 miles. And critically, it's cheap. The idea is to bring back the concept of a new $10,000 or $15,000 starter car.
Making transportation affordable again.
Right.
But the American market doesn't have these. And the source material explains exactly why. The CAFE regulation.
The corporate average fuel economy standard.
We need to spend a minute on this because it's a brilliant example of a policy creating the exact opposite of its intention.
It really is. CAFE, which was originally implemented under Reagan to improve fuel efficiency, operates based on the vehicle's footprint.
The area between the four wheels.
That's right. And the policy structure gives companies a lower fuel economy target a pass, essentially, if the vehicle's footprint is larger.
So bigger cars get an easier target.
And conversely, if you want to make a tiny fuel-efficient car, the regulation demands a much, much higher miles per gallon standard to get approved.
Wait, hold on. So the law designed to save fuel unintentionally incentivized bigger cars by punishing small ones.
It's a textbook example of a perverse incentive loop. Why would Ford or GM spend billions trying to hit impossible MPG targets on a $15,000 tiny car?
When they can make a massive profit selling a $50,000 truck or SUV that benefits from laxer standards just because it's big.
Precisely. And this is why 75% of all new car registrations in 2024 are SUVs or trucks. The policy directly benefits the creation and sale of extensive oversized vehicles.
So you have regulations pushing up housing costs through complexity and pushing up car costs through these weird design incentives. Now, the counter-argument against tiny cars is safety. We can't ignore that.
Absolutely not. While the price point is appealing, the safety data is sobering. A UK study that was cited suggested that if you're in one of these small vehicles, your chance of surviving a head-on accident is less than 50%.
Wow. That's a critical detail, especially when you think about the American driving environment.
Exactly. U.S. roads are engineered differently than in Europe. We have much wider lanes, which is generally a safety measure against, accidental sideswiping.
But if you put a tiny, lightweight car in that environment...
An environment dominated by massive SUVs and F-150s, the outcome of a collision is just far more disastrous. And then there's the cultural preference.
Right. The average American driver, particularly the male demographic, just overwhelmingly prefers the perceived safety and utility of a big vehicle.
So you have policy, safety, and culture all aligned against the tiny car solution.
It feels like all these paths that are intended to increase affordability just run into policy inertia or unintended consequences. Let's try to connect this policy discussion to the broader cultural and geopolitical shifts around immigration, which also links back to national stability and, how we allocate resources.
Okay. This brings us to the discussion of who we want coming to the U.S., which is a topic that frequently flares up in the political debate.
And we heard comments from Donald Trump calling for a permanent pause on what he called third world migration.
Yes, from countries he specifically named as hellholes, like Afghanistan, Haiti, and Somalia. He stated a desire to prioritize immigrants from Western European countries.
Norway, Sweden, Denmark. But the immediate reality check on that is pretty simple. Those people don't come here in large numbers because they just don't have to.
That's exactly it. Those nations offer comprehensive womb-to-tomb social support systems. Their citizens are generally not economically motivated to leave their stable homelands for the uncertainty of the U.S.
Not unless there's some highly specialized talent being recruited.
Correct. The economic calculus for mass migration just isn't there.
So to understand the current immigration stream, we really have to look at the policy pivot that happened about half a century ago.
The major policy driver was Lyndon B. Johnson's post-1965 Civil Rights Bill. Before that legislation, U.S. immigration quotas heavily favored Europe. About 85% of immigrants came from that region.
And after 1965.
The quotas fundamentally shifted to prioritize 85% of immigrants coming from outside of Europe. This change drastically reshaped the cultural and socioeconomic mix of immigrants coming to the United States.
And this leads right into the very charged discussion on cultural compatibility.
It does.
The Statue of Liberty message is about opportunity, right? Give me you're tired, you're poor. But the argument that's often made is that there's a distinction between legal immigrants who seek opportunity, who want to integrate, learn English, become fully American,
versus those who may be using refugee status or illegal channels and bring cultural incompatibilities.
And the concern that was expressed in the sources is that unvetted or high-volume immigration flows, especially from conflict zones, risk importing cultural issues that are incompatible with Western legal frameworks.
Sharia law was cited as an example. The fear is transforming parts of the U.S. into what one source called Refugee Central, which puts a massive strain on local infrastructure and resources.
Well, this isn't just an American problem. The sources used the UK as a specific cautionary tale.
They did. The anecdote focused on the deterioration of safety and policing in London and across the UK since the 1980s.
And what did they attribute that to?
A combination of, one, the liberalization of rules regarding immigration, and two, critically, a massive reduction in the police force. They now have about a third less police than they did decades ago.
So the argument is that less policing combined with unmanaged flows of immigrants who may not respect local laws leads to an inability to control social order,
Creating real safety concerns and eroding public trust. This whole discussion is framed as a critical analysis of the long-term consequences of rapid policy and demographic shifts.
So whether you agree with that cultural sentiment or not, it clearly connects the dots from affordability, which drives political dissatisfaction,
To policy, which drives everything from the size of your car to the makeup of your community.
We've been talking about local policy and national stability. These are issues that require massive capital investment.
Mhm.
And speaking of massive capital, the biggest movement of funds we're tracking right now is flowing not into housing, but straight into Hollywood. And it's initiating what is essentially corporate warfare for one of the world's most valuable media companies.
We are talking about the high-stakes auction for Warner Bros. Discovery WBD. It holds some of the world's most recognizable and valuable intellectual property.
And this whole bidding war started when Netflix showed interest.
Right, but it very quickly became an open, hostile fight.
Netflix had an implied, initially favored bid around $27 a share, but then Paramount, specifically Skydance, led by David Ellison, decided to bypass management entirely.
And take their offer directly to the shareholder.
Exactly. They launched a hostile bid of $30 a share.
And a hostile takeover means they're appealing over the heads of the current WBD board. They're making their case directly to the people who actually own the company.
Which puts immense pressure on the board to act in the shareholders' best interests.
Which usually means taking the highest cash offer. And the hostile nature was basically confirmed when a major player, Mario Gabelli, he manages $31 billion and owns 3.5% of WBD, publicly endorsed the $30 a share offer.
So his public support essentially forced WBD management's hand?
They had to seriously consider the hostile bid at that point.
And the reason this moves from just a business transaction to a geopolitical story is the source of the capital that's backing Ellison.
This is where it gets really interesting.
The financial backing for this hostile bid revealed this massive Middle Eastern influence.
Yes. The Saudi, Qatar, and Abu Dhabi investment funds are committing a staggering $24 billion to the Paramount Ellison consortium.
$24 billion.
Which is more than double the amount Ellison himself is putting up, which is around $11.8 billion. And the sources also confirm that Jared Kushner's fund is involved in coordinating this enormous flow of capital.
Okay, so the core question here is why? Why are these powerful Gulf states committing tens of billions of dollars to owning a piece of Hollywood media? Is this purely a financial investment, or is the so what here really about influence?
It is deeply strategic. You have to view the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia's PIF, Qatar's QIA, Abu Dhabi's ADIA, as 50 to 100-year planners.
They're not chasing quarterly profits.
No, they're positioning for century-long dominance. On the investment side, they are shrewd, long-term players focused on diversifying away from oil.
Even though they have vast reserves.
Vast, understated reserves. It costs Saudi Arabia as little as $1.40 a barrel to extract. But they recognize the long-term global shift away from hydrocarbons. And their track record, with massive early investments in WeWork and Uber, it shows they're willing to take enormous calculated risks for equity in global giants.
Okay, that's the investment side. What about the influence side? This is about controlling the narrative, isn't it?
Absolutely. The massive investments in global sports, what people often call sports washing, that's all designed to combat negative international perceptions and modernize their image.
So owning a piece of a major Western media engine like WBD gives them a powerful tool to shape global perceptions.
It gives them a seat at the table to ensure favorable coverage, positive messaging, through news divisions and entertainment programming. It's mirroring the kind of global reach and influence achieved by state-backed operations like Al Jazeera.
And speaking of that immense capital and that long-term vision, Ray Dalio, the legendary investor, He had a specific take on Abu Dhabi's strategy.
He did. Dalio, based on his 30 years of observation in the region, called Abu Dhabi the potential Silicon Valley of capitalists.
The Silicon Valley of capitalists.
He explained it's driven by an incredible strategic commitment to asset management. They're managing their own vast pools of money first, and their extremely early commitment to technologies like artificial intelligence.
So that sophisticated deployment of capital is attracting top global talent.
Creating this vibrant ecosystem that explains why they are able to deploy $24 billion into a complex bid like this one.
Now let's bring in the CNN factor, because that makes this a political hot potato in Washington.
Right.
David Ellison reportedly made a key promise to the White House regarding CNN, which is currently owned by WBD.
Yes, he promised the White House sweeping changes at CNN. Specifically, he committed to creating a news network based on truth that serves the 70% of Americans in the middle.
A promise for political neutrality and competition.
That's how it's framed.
And that promise immediately frames the deal in a regulatory light, because the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, gets involved.
Exactly. Former President Trump had previously voiced concern that the FTC might block a Netflix acquisition of WBAD, specifically because it would become too big, too powerful, serious anti-competition concerns.
But the Paramount Television bid, backed by all this global capital, is framed as creating competition.
Right. By promising a neutral middle 70% news network, they're positioning themselves as a force challenging the entrenched dominance of existing politically polarized networks.
So potentially threatening Fox News and MSNBC at the same time.
That's the idea.
So the regulatory body might actually favor the deep-pocketed hostile bid because it promises competitive diversity in the media landscape.
It's a very clever political play.
And we just have to remind everyone what WBD actually owns, because the value isn't just in the cash flow, it's in the intellectual property.
The catalog is immense. It defines global culture. You're talking about the entire DC universe, the Harry Potter franchise, Lord of the Rings, The Matrix, and crucially, they own the entire HBO library.
Which is the crown jewel of prestige TV.
The Sopranos, Succession, Game of Thrones, The Wire. Gaining or losing control of this catalog fundamentally determines the success of any streaming service for the next decade.
This is why the investment is so significant. You're not just buying a network.
You're buying culture itself.
Okay, so shifting gears from those geopolitical power plays back to your own personal financial foundation, let's look at some investment wisdom.
Great idea.
We're aiming this conversation at the average earner, let's say people making between $80,000 and $250,000 a year. You may not be a Saudi PIF fund manager.
Probably not.
But the sources show there is a simple, proven, and let's be honest, a somewhat boring path to wealth.
We need to start with the mechanics of wealth, not the psychology. And the data confirms the immense power of consistent, disciplined saving.
Like in your 401k.
Exactly. Fidelity just reported a record high of 654,000 401k millionaires. And that's just at their brokerage. T. Rowe Price saw a remarkable 100% doubling of 401k millionaires just since 2022.
A doubling.
This is the simple, powerful truth, starting early and staying consistent in those tax-advantaged accounts. It works.
So what's the immediate, actionable advice for someone listening who wants to join that millionaire club?
Look, unless you are a professional full-time trader, you must employ dollar-cost averaging.
Explain that.
It just means you put the same amount of money in every pay period, regardless of whether the market is up or down. You pick a mix of the top 5 best-performing mutual funds, looking consistently at the 5, 10, 15, and 25-year results. You do not try to time the market.
And the non-negotiable rule, the double-dumb scenario.
If your company offers a 401k match, you must invest at least enough to receive the full company match.
It's free money.
It's free, guaranteed money. Failing to do that is turning down a 50 or 100% return on your investment instantly. It is the most egregious financial error an average employee can make.
Okay, now let's shift to market signals. The real estate sector, which we talked about earlier, is showing some signs of moderation, specifically through what's called the delisting surge. What is a delisting?
A delisting is simply when a seller takes their home off the market after failing to find a buyer at their desired price.
And this is happening more often now.
Dramatically more. Delistings in October 2025 were up 45.5% year-to-date and 38% from the previous October. It's the highest rate since they started tracking in 2022.
So that's a pretty important signal. What does it actually mean for prices?
It signals that prices are peaking or beginning to moderate, meaning going down slightly, and previously hot markets like Miami, Denver, and Houston.
What's the psychology there?
It's simple. Sellers are trying to capture peak prices, but buyers are finally resisting. So realtors are advising them to delist because a home that sits on the market for 90 or 120 days, it develops a stigma,
Buyers assume something's wrong with it.
or that the price is just way too inflated. By delisting, the seller resets that days on market counter to zero, and they can quietly adjust the price down a bit for a fresh start later.
So if you're a buyer or an investor, what's the strategy?
For a long-term homeowner, someone looking for a family home for 5 or 10 years, the advice is simple. Buy when you need to and ride out the short-term fluctuations.
But for investors,
For young buyers or speculative investors, the suggestion is that the market may still go lower. Young professionals, specifically, are being advised to look beyond the extremely expensive coasts and focus on pro-business, low-tax red cities where demand is starting to surge.
places like
Places like Grand Rapids, St. Louis, Cleveland, Pittsburgh. These cities still offer the opportunity for homeownership before they catch the same affordability crisis as the big metros.
this moves us from the mechanics of wealth to more of the psychology and advanced strategies. The best long-term wealth comes from owning equity. We saw this with Magic Johnson.
Magic Johnson is the ultimate case study. Jerry Buss, the owner of the Lakers, gave Magic a 4.5% equity stake in the team.
Not just a salary.
Right. And when Johnson eventually sold that stake, the profit was massive. It dwarfed his career earnings from playing. It just underscores the fundamental lesson. Getting a slice of ownership, getting equity, is the true engine of generational wealth.
And Kevin Durant's investment success highlights the importance of location and network.
This is an incredibly subtle but powerful point.
The biggest returns came after he moved.
Overwhelmingly, Durant had remarkable returns. 36x on Whoop, 21x on Robinhood, 15x on Postmates. But these successes happened after he moved from Oklahoma City to Golden State.
Because that put him in proximity to Silicon Valley.
It positioned him literally blocks away. It gave him access to the network, the deal flow, the institutional knowledge of top-tier VCs and founders. Proximity to wealth and innovation drastically multiplied his opportunities. Location dictates not just your housing cost, but your access to wealth-generating networks.
We have to briefly touch on the significant, deep-seated skepticism about Bitcoin that came from some highly experienced investors in the sources.
The skepticism is based on two pillars. First, this long-held geopolitical belief that the collapse of U.S. financial markets would primarily benefit adversarial states like China and Russia.
In a second.
Deep questions about Bitcoin's decentralized origins. The experts cited expressed profound doubt that Bitcoin was created by some unknown individual working alone.
Some Japanese guy in a cave story.
They find that narrative highly questionable, hinting instead at potential sophisticated state or institutional involvement.
So if you're a highly successful, experienced investor, where's the preference for tangible assets?
The preference is clear and conservative. The experts stated they would rather own 1% of all U.S. farmland, a hard, tangible resource-producing asset, than any amount of Bitcoin. The focus is on long-term assets with intrinsic value, not volatile digital currency.
Okay, finally, let's close with a fascinating cultural observation that's tied directly to career advancement. Pretty privilege.
An unspoken but very real requirement in some fields.
The analysis, which was drawn from executive interviews, highlighted how looking young and attractive is increasingly an unspoken job requirement, especially for women in public-facing roles like PR or as executive assistants.
We heard from a 44-year-old PR executive who invests heavily in cosmetic procedures, Botox fillers, because she worries daily about how long she will remain publicly relevant. What happens to her professional trajectory as she ages?
And the sources noted a really stark gender difference in how this privilege operates.
Absolutely. For men, things like status, money, power, humor, even certain displays of swag, owning an exotic car or a massive home often outweigh looks. The sources explicitly noted that the Hall of Fame of successful businessmen had 0 men with six-packs.
For men, capability and financial status are the primary currencies.
But for women, especially early in their careers, appearance can carry disproportionate weight in certain industries.
So if pretty privilege is too blunt a term, what is the true professional requirement?
It's defined not as hotness, but as looking sharp, being put together. Employers are fundamentally looking for high character, competence, and reliability.
Which means meticulous hygiene, sharp presentation, professional attire.
But all of those external factors fall apart very quickly if the communication is weak. The veteran managers cited a great line. A lot of people can pass the look test, but then they stick their foot in their mouth.
So communication skills are the ultimate test.
The most crucial and difficult test to pass.
And this touches on a cultural shift in resilience, especially in receiving feedback. The sources suggest a big difference in how men and women respond to direct coaching.
The suggestion is that men are often more resilient and willing to accept harsh, blunt coaching, the kind of feedback that says, you're fat, you're sloppy, clean it up, and they adjust their behavior quickly.
Whereas women, the sources argued, often don't respond to that style of direct and, let's be honest, potentially abrasive coaching.
Right, and this reflects a broader cultural challenge in the modern workplace where resilience may be diminishing, which just reinforces the necessity for competence and reliability to outweigh any external privilege.
This has been a true deep dive into the pressures shaping our present and our future. We started with the extreme economic pressure on that 18 to 29 age bracket and how it's driving a massive 56-point political shift.
Then we saw how complex regulatory structures like CAFE unintentionally favor expensive, oversized vehicles, which just compounds the affordability problem.
We then explored the high-stakes geopolitical influence that's embedded in the future of Hollywood media, driven by that long-term Middle Eastern capital aiming to control both assets and narratives.
And we finished with the accessible path to wealth through disciplined, consistent investing, the boring strategies that actually build 401k millionaires, while acknowledging that advanced wealth creation involves strategic decisions about equity, network, and, of course, location.
We specifically discussed how location, exemplified by Kevin Durant's move to Golden State and his proximity to Silicon Valley, can drastically multiply your investment opportunities. And that brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener. If the affordability crisis continues to worsen in major American cities, Miami, LA, New York, and it forces the young professional generation out of these high opportunity centers, what new geography, domestically or internationally, will become the next great Silicon Valley for that 18 to 29 demographic? Where will it be that attracts the talent, the capital, and the network effects away from the established, unaffordable centers?
Something to consider as you make your long-term plans. The future often belongs to those who spot the affordable opportunity before everyone else does.
We'll talk to you next time for the next deep dive.